Well, it's very nice to meet everybody this morning. My name is Boz, and I'm not an engineer. I looked at the quiz the concept inventory y'all just took, and I would have been finished first. Because I don't know how to do any of that. I am not an engineer. I don't math at all, really. I am a writer by trade. I have an MFA in creative writing, and got into college teaching in order to earn that MFA, and then somehow stumbled along until finally I got hired by LSU, where I've been working for 11 years with the College of Engineering. I work in about 70 engineering courses a semester, plus teaching my own English classes, so they keep me happy. When I was hired, I said, I don't know if I'm right for this job. I'm kind of the opposite of an engineer, and Dr. Wagensback, the associate dean at the time, said, we have all the technical minds we can use. We need something different. And I said, oh, well, then that's me. So anyway, the presentation that I'm giving today is a presentation that I give to the students, obviously, but because y'all are not students, feel free to interrupt me or ask any questions or anything like that. I'm going to proceed as though you are students, okay? But I also know you're not, so don't hesitate to raise a hand or a comment or whatever, okay? So, presentation today is on speaking and writing. So just a quick inventory of what we're going to be talking about. First of all, I'm going to talk about developing an effective writing process. I'm going to talk a little bit about giving good technical presentations. And then very briefly, I'm going to talk a little bit about posters, because they are a different kind of presentation that we see our students doing very often. Before I talk about anything at all, though, if it has to do with communications, the first thing we have to understand is something called the rhetorical triangle. How many of you are familiar with the rhetorical triangle? Anybody? I'll bet you if I start saying the Greek words that usually sit on the corners of this triangle, you'll know them, right? So if I say ethos, what it comes with? Pathos and logos, right? Everybody knows those three Greek words. Nobody knows what they mean. So what a wonderful day in English class that was for everyone, right? Basically what those three words mean there are three questions that you have to know the answers to before you can make good choices in your rhetorical strategy. Right? And I'm always careful about saying words like rhetorical strategy because, first of all, big words that nobody knows what they mean. But also rhetorical rhetoric can have a negative connotation. Rhetorical questions when you don't have to answer. When you want to blow off somebody's words in politics or whatever, you say, well, that's just a political rhetoric. It can be a negative word. But really all rhetoric means is making your position understood, right? Getting your point across. That's rhetoric, okay? So a rhetorical strategy means how am I going to do that? Right? So the first thing that you've got to understand is your audience. Who is your audience? There's a couple of things to this. First of all, you have to know what your audience is capable of understanding. Right? If I'm an engineer and if I'm a mechanical engineer and I'm talking to a room full of mechanical engineers, then I can use all of my jargon and I can use terms that normal people don't understand, right? If I'm a mechanical engineer and I'm talking to different kinds of engineers, electrical engineers, chemical engineers, petroleum engineers, well, some overlap will be there, but maybe not 100%. So I need to broaden the way I speak. If I'm speaking to an educated audience that doesn't include engineers, or maybe includes people from marketing and English and whatever, once again, I have to broaden. And then if I speak to the general population, who may or may not have an education beyond the 6th grade, then that's a change in the way I have to speak. A lot of times people refer to that as dumbing down. But I'll tell you what, it's a lot harder to change the way you talk for a broader audience than it is to use the comfortable terminology and jargon that you use every day. So really, dumbing down is the opposite way that you should think about it, all right? So understanding what your audience is capable of, what level can I speak, at what register do I have to perform? The second thing that I have to understand about my audience is their interest level. Are they already interested in what I have to say? In engineering, very often that interest comes from the fact that the company's paid me a metric ton of money to figure something out, right? So I might say, hey, you spent that metric ton of money, here's what you're going to get for that spending. But other times, it's not going to be a return on investment issue. Sometimes it's going to be something more emotional, where I have to make you understand the importance of something. My old boss, one time, he was a consulting engineer cleaning up environmental messes. And there was something in the ground that had to come up and be burned. And he had to explain to the engineers that were going to do it how to do it. He had to explain to the people in the town why, the politicians in the town, why it needed to be done. But he also had to explain to the general people in the town that this can't stay in the ground. This is bad for you. And even though smoke will stink and be ugly, better to burn it than to leave it there, right? So that's a real world kind of thing that very often students will have to do if they become engineers, okay? Second thing, purpose. There are a lot of reasons, this would be logos, by the way. There are a lot of reasons why we speak, why we write, why we present. And if you're not clear what you're trying to accomplish, then I'm going to suggest you're going to have a hard time accomplishing it, right? One of the things that I love to do to people who are trying to get something done around campus is I'll say, tell me in one sentence what we're trying to do here today. And if they can't do it, I usually sit back and just wait for the whole thing to fall apart, because it's going to, because you don't have focus, you don't have direction. So if you don't know what you're trying to accomplish, that's going to be a major problem for you. Finally, credibility, ethos. How many of you have ever looked at a letter and seen misspelled words and poor punctuation and thought, idiot, toss the whole thing out? Anybody? Okay, well, what if I told you that spelling and grammar are very different than intelligence, and you could have quality content that's poorly spelled and punctuated? So what a shame that something as simple as hitting spell check or maybe running it past that friend who's good in English, as the phrase goes, could have saved that, right? You might have thrown some great ideas away just because somebody doesn't really know what a run-on sentence is or how to spell a certain word, okay? So there's a lot of ways that we can lose credibility. So the three questions, once again: who's my audience? What are they capable of understanding, and how do I make them ready to listen to what I have to say? Logos, what am I trying to accomplish? And then credibility, ethos. What do I have to do to maintain credibility with this audience? Once you know the answers to those three questions, then you're ready to start making good choices. And with communications, that's what we're doing. Most of you in here, I'm guessing, would rather solve for X. Communications aren't like that, okay? Communications are about better and worse, not right and wrong, okay? Except for punctuation. That has right and wrong. Anyway, so moving forward, one of the things that I really want engineers to understand is that communications cannot be some pain in the posterior that happens after you're done with the engineering. It needs to be integrated into your engineering process, all right? For a lot of reasons, right? Documenting what you've done, being able to refer back to something. Also, the notes you take in something like this. This, by the way, is a senior design notebook from one of our mechanical engineering classes at LSU. These people were able to use this notebook as the rough draft, as the early generative writing for their papers, right? So if you know going in that you're going to have to be documenting what you do, if you're thinking about and writing things down and taking pictures and making charts and graphs and all of that, I'm going to suggest that not only does that help you be prepared if you have to defend decisions or something like that, but it will make you not only a better communicator, but also a better engineer. One of the things that frustrates me to no end is when I ask students, how's your paper coming? And they say, oh, well, I didn't start yet because we don't have our data. What's wrong with that? Yeah. To say you can't start because you don't have your data is wrong-headed. To say you can't finish because you don't have your data makes sense to me. But before you step foot into the lab, you could have done your literature review. You should be reviewing your methodology. You should be understanding why this is important and ready to write your introduction. And if you've done some writing in those areas, then when you step into the lab or begin to design the thing or whatever you're doing, then you'll understand better what you're expecting to see, what your expected results are. Which means that once you start to see those results, you're more invested in them and understanding them so that when the time comes, you can make more robust conclusions and better recommendations, right? And that's really what we're about here. It's not just engineering doesn't happen in some lab somewhere just to be done. It has to go out into the world and be applied. And lives and property are at risk sometimes, so it's very important that engineers be as invested as possible. And thinking and being involved in communications from the beginning of the process, like I say all the time, will not only make you a better communicator, but will also make you a better engineer. So this is vital, this concept especially. A lot of times, this is where I'll just go ahead and do it for you. How many of you love writing? Okay, so that's not surprising because you've gone a little bit further than some in your educations and all of that. Usually when I say how many love writing, nobody raises their hand. They always go, and I'll say, how many of you would rather have extensive dental work than write a paragraph, and then the hands go up, okay? One of the issues that people have is writer's baggage. And I'm an English teacher, and I'm here to apologize for my profession because we did that to you. We wrote notes in the margins that were critical, but very rarely helpful, right? And if you tell me I'm doing something wrong every day, eventually I'm going to stop wanting to do it at all. And that's often what's happened to students with their writing, okay? So what happens is you get this, something's due tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. When do they start? 7? or 10 o'clock the night before, right? But they're not engaging in a week-long process with revision and edit and all of that. And if they're anything like me, especially when I was in college, I'd have to write something. I'd be like, okay, gotta write, ready to write. Oh, gotta have laundry. Gotta do laundry now. And then, okay, laundry's done. Gonna write. Gonna make a sandwich. Gotta have a sandwich. I'm starving. And I'll do anything until finally it's 2 a.m. And then I just sit down and go and type something out. Maybe if it's not too late, I remember to hit spell check, remember to hit print, throw it in my book bag, and oh well, the teacher's the only one that's going to see it anyway, right? It's terrible. It's terrible. If they understand the importance of a full process, which begins even before this, it begins with thinking. I get stranded on Highland Road every day coming home from work, and I do some wonderful work there. I remember one time I was laying on my bed staring at the ceiling. My wife was like, honey, can you do the dishes? And I was like, I'm busy. Because I was thinking. It didn't work. I had to do the dishes. But still, I was thinking, right? That part is important. But at some point, you have to separate the noise that's in your head from the work you're doing, right? You have to separate the engineering work or whatever writing it is from, is it wrong to eat pizza 5 days in a row? Or why is she still mad at me? Or whatever. You got to get it down on paper. That's this part, pre-writing. I put the design notebook here because it's an excellent example, or a lab notebook. But it could also be brainstorming, something where what I often tell the students is, you got a timer on your phone, set it for 5 minutes and just write. Don't worry about spelling, don't worry about it being right, just get it out of your head. Because once it's on the page in a tangible form, now I can adjust it, now I can work with it, now I can change it into what it needs to be. And that is where this part comes in, outlining. How many of you in here learned the Roman numeral 1, capital letter A, formal outline? How many of you like that? Yeah. It's better than nothing. It works. But there's nothing magical about it. Right? And I'll tell you why you had to learn it. Because it's easy to grade and easy to teach. It's very formal. It's very structured. Right? But there are a million ways to outline. In fact, I actually have a hero in English, which is weird, right? It's kind of weird. A guy named Patrick Hartwell. He taught at the Indiana University of Pennsylvania. And one of the things he did was he surveyed a lot of professional writers to find out how many of these English teacher myths were actually true. And the formal outline, like 2% of them, I forget the number, but it was a ridiculously small percentage of them actually used it. But the inverse, like 98% of them did use an outline, just not that formal one. Okay. Let me ask you another question. How many of you did the Roman numeral 1, capital letter A outline, but did it after you wrote the paper? Anybody? Okay, so that turns out to have been good practice for something that I'm going to talk about in a second. But anyway, so once you got outlining, which can take almost any form, right? Any way that you're getting a roadmap to where you want to go, that's outlining. Then drafting. This is where most people live and die. This is the 10 o'clock draft where, by the time I finally get started writing, it's 1:30, and that's what that is. And people turn in their rough drafts, and then are they surprised that they're getting low grades? They shouldn't be. And maybe that's why they got all that negative feedback over the years, and it kind of perpetuates itself, right? So if I could do anything, it would be getting students to start sooner and go through this process, because what they're leaving off is the most important part, revising and editing. Who knows the difference? They're two words. They must mean different things, right?
Editing to do the last thing. I mean, you're editing all the time when you're revising, but your final edit to be just an edit.
So, but you're using those words still. What is revising versus editing? What's the difference? Anybody?
Revising is kind of moving it around and changing it. Editing is taking out what you don't want, shaping it up.
Okay. Y'all are kind of on it. Yeah, revising is big picture concerns, right? Revising is where I'm moving paragraphs around or making sure, like if I've been asked to solve 10 things and I've only got 8, I've got some revising to do, right? Or if I'm talking about number 8 before I've talked about number 7, and number 7 is important to understanding number 8, then I need to move number 7 up. That's revising, big picture stuff. Editing is surface area stuff, grammar, spelling, making sure that it's clean, making sure that it doesn't go, idiot, and get tossed aside, right? Like y'all all said you had done in the past. Here's an analogy that works well with especially mechanical engineers, but might work well with you guys. When you are building a machine, when you worry about painting it, last, when everything works, then you start thinking paint or powder coat, what color, because the paint is the surface, it's not the function. Revising is making sure the paper or the presentation functions. Editing is making sure it's presentable to the public. Now, as you said, Rain said, you edit the whole time. Obviously, if you see you misspelled a word, correct it, because you might miss it later, right? But it's a matter of where your focus is. So first, you start with the big picture stuff. Have I done all 10 things? Then maybe you start thinking at the paragraph level, or the section level, then the paragraph level, then the sentence level. Then later on, when you're putting the comma in, taking the comma out, putting the comma in, looking up comma rules online, when you get to that level, you're almost done. Okay? But it's important to go through all of these. Okay? And then there's one other thing here that I've left off that is also an important part of the writing process that students forget about. And the reason they forget about it is because it's kind of meaningless at their level. And I've already talked about this a little bit. This idea of presentation or publication. Okay? Because students think if I write a lousy paper, it's a secret. By law, you can't tell people how terrible it is, right? But when you graduate, all of a sudden this writing means something. This presentation means something. People are going to act on it. People are going to keep this for future reference. You know, I personally don't want to get on the airplane that was designed by an engineer who thought everything he wrote was a secret. Right? So what happens after the writing is also important. In my classes, if nothing else, I have each student read some passages aloud from their paper to the class, just so they know that it's not a private conversation. Okay, the grade is, the writing is not. So, important steps of the writing process. This actually is a paper that I wrote, gosh, it's been a long time now, 2009. This is a paper I wrote with my boss. And my words are the black and his words are the red. And you might think, you were in trouble, dude. But no, this was the lousy first draft, all right? And one of the things I tell my students all the time is you have to give yourself permission to write a lousy first draft. Don't try to be perfect out of the gate, okay? Because if you do that, you'll write a sentence and you'll stop and you'll back up and you'll write it again, and stop and back, and you never make progress, okay? So if you take the pressure off and just say this first draft is going to be lousy, and we know that, because that implies a couple of things. First of all, by calling it the first draft, that implies there will be a second, and by calling the first one lousy, it implies the second will be less lousy. The third one will be maybe not lousy at all. Maybe the fourth one will start to be worth something, right? But you're making that understanding that this is not a one-off. This is an iterative process. You know, just like their engineering designs, right? Nobody's going to design something at 10 o'clock the night before and start building it the next morning. It's going to go through critical review. Same thing with their papers. I also encourage students not to do marathons. Most of them know this about studying, not to just sit down and stare at a book for 6 hours, because after a while your brain shuts down. Same thing happens with revising and editing. After a while, you stop seeing your own errors, right? You'd be writing they are, and then the phone rings. Oh yeah, I'll see you at 6, okay, bye, click, is. Now your paper says they is. And you're pretty sure that's wrong. What'll happen is your eyes won't catch it. You'll read it, and your eyes will tell you it says they are. But somebody else can look at it and go, what is wrong with you? They is? Really? That kind of thing happens all the time, okay? Especially if your brain and your eyes get tired. If your nose has been in the paper too long, you'll stop seeing it as it really is. So, lots of short sessions work better than a long one. And if they're doing group work, this is usually the presentation, apparently I took it out. If they're doing group work, it is important that everyone in the group look at every part. Because some of you have professional experience. Have you ever, out in industry, beyond teaching, have you ever been able to say, oh yeah, this is a terrible conclusion, but Bill wrote that. That's not me. If your name is on it, you own it, right? So you've got to be responsible for it. So sharing the load. If you're the lead author, that doesn't mean you're the poor soul that pulls an all-nighter to fix this mess. It means you're the one that brings everything together, that farms out the editing and the revising, and brings things back in. So if something's due tomorrow, it's too late to get drafts tonight. I should have gotten those 3 days ago, so that we can go through this iterative process as a group, right? The lead author is the one that organizes all the revising and editing, not the one that has to do it all. In fact, if there's one thing about group work I'd love for students to understand, group work doesn't mean the smart one does everything, and the other 3 are along for the ride. Group work means somebody has to facilitate and make sure everybody has a part, okay? And the same is true of writing. So, a lot of times, the way, So a lot of times, I'm going to move on to the presenting here. A lot of times, people need to understand order, right? How many of you have heard of IMRAD format? Introduction, methodology, results, and discussion. It's kind of like that, yeah. So, very often students want to do things in the order that they discover them, right? So I just want you to sit along with me on this, ride along with me through this. Imagine that we're designing an automated retrieval system. It has an onboard CPU, independently actuated appendages, which is fun to say and write, clamp mounted on a 3-axis joint. Are y'all imagining as we go? Voice activated, water and air cooled, and runs on biofuel. Do you have it in your minds? Do you have something in your minds? Is it this? I mean, it is 4 independently actuated appendages, right? Clamp mounted on a 3-axis joint, left, right, up, and down, and y'all, I suppose. She's water and air cooled, voice activated. She's very well trained. Runs on biofuel. Right? I mean, all of this is true. If I show you this first, then you understand all of this differently, right? I can't tell you the number of times I've been watching a presentation, for example, and I have no idea what people are talking about because they're talking about little bits and pieces without giving the big picture first. Think about your writing. When do you give the thesis statement? I know y'all are more math types, but y'all remember where the thesis statement comes, right? In the introduction, right? If you're writing a technical paper, even before that, you usually have an abstract or an executive summary, right? So you're accustomed in writing, usually, to telling people what the big picture is first, and then you go into great detail. But with presentations, very often people forget that. Right? Presentations, people want to start with these little minutiae, talk about, the wing, the wheels, the rudder, and then later we figure out, oh, you're building an airplane. Oh, okay, great. Wings are probably a good clue, but still. I remember sitting in a senior design presentation a few years back where actually it was the SAE Aero team, the airplane team, showed a picture of their airplane on the second slide, and the industry panel all stood up and gave a standing ovation just in the moment because they'd been watching presentations all week and it was the first time they had a clue what the presentations were from the beginning. So context first, right? Another thing that happens all the time, like I said, usually there's a writing assignment that begins with the presentation, and very often, very often people will have a lot of writing somewhere, right? They'll have tons of writing, and they know what they want to say, but getting it said is kind of a trick and all of that, so I'm surprised nobody's done it. Thank you. Were you shy about doing it earlier? Yeah. You know why they raised their hand? Because they read the whole slide, and right here it says, if you read this far, raise your hand. We'll see how many do it. Now, those of you who had your hands up, or would have had your hands up in a different scenario, what did I say? You have no idea. So this is a trick slide. The trick here is that your brain cannot simultaneously listen to words and read words. Can't do it. You're not able to do it. How many of you are good multitaskers? No, you're not. Put your hands down. You're task switchers. Okay? Then you're an excellent task switcher, but you're not a multitasker, you're a task switcher. Meaning that in a scenario like this, you can read a little, listen a little, read a little, listen a little. But when I put a lot of words on the slide like this, I'm basically forcing you to make a choice. Will I read or will I listen? And that's a bad choice. However, what our minds are very gifted at doing is interpreting images while listening to words. Think about it. What is a movie? What is a TV show? What is a YouTube video? It's images paired with language, right? So this is a better approach. Now, what students do all the time, usually they don't do as bad as this, right? I don't usually see paragraphs filling up the slide. I used to. Back in 2006 when I started at LSU, this would not have been an uncommon slide. We've gotten better. Okay? I remember back then I used to teach, limit your slides to 6 to 8 lines. Now I say, no lines, right? Sort of like, I'll continue to explain in a minute, but too many words forces me to that choice, right? And if we're going to do that, if I'm going to just send around words, why couldn't I just send an email? Have you ever been sitting through a presentation going, you could have sent this to me at my desk, I could have read it to myself, and I could have gotten some work done today. But now because I have to sit and listen to you talk, I have to stay until 6 to get this report done. Thanks! Okay, so maybe it's not just me. Good. So a better way to approach. This is what I see all the time. I mean, don't look for meaning. There's no meaning. Literally, I just hit chart in Excel, and this is what came out. But this is the structure of a slide I usually see, right? I'll see a heading up at the top. I'll see maybe some kind of graphic off to the side. Yes, there ought to be units here. I'll change it later. And then other stuff here, right? Words, whatever. Is this a good slide? Is it a great slide?
No.
No. If my students get to this level, I say, okay, at least you got to that level. Congratulations on your seat. But we can do better. Here's why I don't like it. First of all, this word results. You know what? Once again, I'm not an engineer. So when I'm sitting in these presentations, you know what I think when I see the word results? Yeah, I think one more slide and we're done. I get conclusion and I can go home, right? It's taking up what? 20% of the vertical space for one very generic heading? Maybe. I'm not sure that fixes the issue, though. I hear what you're saying, but I'm not sure that fixes the issue I'm getting at. I'm going to suggest that a single word heading taking up 20% of the vertical space is not accomplishing a lot. And it may be accomplishing exactly what you don't want, which is what it accomplishes with me. I'm almost free, you know. Then this. Once again, there should be units. I'm very embarrassed about the lack of units on the answer here. But not a bad chart. I mean, you can read all the numbers and things, right? Pretty colors. You know, it's not bad. But very often, the people that need to see this most are the guys in the back with eyesight like mine, okay, which is not good, all right? And this is small enough that it might be difficult to interpret quickly, okay? Because remember, if you're listening to me, what you get off the slide, you need to be able to get quickly so that you can continue to pay attention to the presentation. Hey, I'm the presentation. These are my visual aids. I am what you need to be listening to. Okay? In a good presentation, I will always be more interesting than what's on my slides. Right? And then finally, these words. Ask yourself, or let me ask you and be honest. Think back to the last time you were a student, first day in class. Was this in college probably? Did you ever think, they're just going to read the syllabus today. I'm going to pretend I don't know where the room is. I'm going to sleep late. Anybody? I totally did that all the time. I would still skip my first days if I could. I'm kidding. I just do something different now. But a lot of students do that. They're like, they're just going to read the syllabus and go over the rules, and I don't need that. I can read myself, right? How many of you really like being read to? How many of you like being read to in a presentation? Yeah, no, that's terrible, right? When somebody just stands there going, here you would tell us what the chart implies. Eye contact. You would usually follow up with other points. Eye contact. I mean, that's terrible. Nobody wants it, right? Who are the bullets for? The speaker. They're not even for the audience. The speaker uses these as a crutch. This is my, I hate public speaking. There's a bunch of people staring at me. Oh no, what am I supposed to say? I forgot. Here's what the chart implies. I got it down. You don't need it, right? If it's your information, if it's your presentation, hopefully you know your content well enough that visual cues will help you just as much as written ones, right? Hopefully. So, let's reimagine this, because I would say, first of all, this is showing the teleprompter, and unless you're four, and being read to can be a little tedious. So, let's start with a blank slate. How many of you, when you do a presentation, go immediately to the templates?
I can get really nervous.
Well, now I'm talking about slide design. We'll work on nerves in a second. We'll get there. Slide design. You go immediately to the templates? Stop. I have never heard of a professional engineer who was promoted or hired because of their awesome background. The template isn't what's going to do it. If you're looking for the template to jazz up your presentation, you're looking in the wrong place. Have y'all noticed I haven't had a single background on any of my slides so far? Anybody? Did they look sloppy and unprofessional? No, because I'm paying attention to the part people are paying for, the content. Okay? So a blue background with waves on it, that's not going to save you, right? And in fact, very often those backgrounds will compete with the content. Sometimes there'll be a texture that makes words difficult to see. Or my favorite thing, a gradient, where it goes from light to dark, or light to dark to light, or dark to light to dark. What color font do you use, a light one or a dark one? Because whatever you've got at the top isn't going to contrast well with the bottom, right? So, and not only that, but if you're choosing the templates that pop up right at the front, that's a great way to make your presentation look like every other presentation anybody's giving anywhere. So if you want to fade into the background and not be noticed, maybe those are a good way to go. But I'm going to suggest to you that rather than focusing on the background, focus on the content. So, first thing I'm going to do, instead of writing a generic word like results, I'm going to ask myself, what assertion do I want to make? What do I want my audience to understand? What thought can I plant in your brain? And I'm going to write that in 2 lines of text or less at the top. Why only 2 lines?
So they don't have to just read.
Yeah, because we're task switching here. So I can read 2 lines very quickly without losing track of what the speaker is saying. Okay? This is the assertion that I want this slide to make. It's at the top of the slide. And that leaves me the rest of the slide to give the evidence. Right? This format is actually called assertion evidence format. And it was developed by a guy named Michael Alley at Penn State University in their Linux Center there. He's another MFA like me. He also has a master's degree in engineering. Yeah. But anyway, he has a great book out called The Craft of Scientific Presentations. And it's in it's in the library at LSU, but it is certainly worth a download on your Kindle or whatever. Craft of Scientific Presentations, Michael Alley. Fantastic book. Changed the way that I teach presentations. And this design came from it. Now, you can see nice big evidence backing up this assertion. But there was something on that other slide that was missing, right? The other bullets, right? Chances are that first bullet, that's usually the most important bullet, because that's what's at the front of the people's minds that are building the slides. So that's what ends up here, okay? But those secondary bullets, I can sequence them in. Y'all know that word sequencing? Where you bring things in one at a time? Because even with bullet points, if I put 5 bullet points up, those of you who are readers, while I'm talking about bullet point number 1, y'all are reading bullet point number 5 by then, right? Here, you can't read ahead, because I haven't shown you the next bullet yet. Okay? So I've got this bullet right here. So I've got my assertion, my evidence, and the finer point I want to make about it. And I can talk about this finer point until I'm done with this finer point, and then I can bring in the next one. Okay? And look, I can use elements of composition. This one's orange, so it must have to do with series 2. If it was about category 1, maybe I'd put it over here, right? Or I can use arrows or other things to make clear what it is I'm trying to show you. Maybe this isn't a chart, maybe it's a picture or a schematic or something, and I'm pointing out different parts, popping them in as we discuss them. So you can't be looking at bullet number 5 when I'm still talking about bullet number 2 or 3 or whatever. Okay? Assertion evidence format. It's an excellent way to proceed. Remember that you are visual communication. When did I start making an impression on you today? When I asked who you were.
Yeah.
Not when I was standing around earlier, trying to figure out if we had a clicker or if I was going to hit the thing. Y'all were busy at the time taking a test, so you didn't really look up. Can I tell y'all a story on myself real quick? Do we have time? We have time. Perfect. So I had just gotten my bachelor's degree in English. So employable. Why are you laughing? Anyway, I just got my bachelor's degree in English. And there was this place, an advertising firm in Richmond, Virginia, where I'm from, called Play. I believe they're the ones that came up with Flow, the progressive insurance lending. I'm not positive about that, but they're really creative people. And that was the cool thing. This was one of those places where you could take your dog to work, and like instead of a cubicle, you had a couch with a little clipboard or whatever. And you want to show up at 10, show up at 10. You want to show up at 7, show up at 7, whatever. I really wanted that job. But they were also a serious company, and so I had I had my interview at 9 a.m. And in college especially, I was not a morning person. So I hit their parking lot about 8:59 and 30 seconds, doing about 60 miles an hour. And I mean, it was a gravel parking lot, so I'm spitting gravel up into all the BMWs and stuff, right? And I park, and I got in my stuff, and I'm running in, and I'm like, good morning, I'm here 9 o'clock. They'd been watching me out the window. I blew that job before I parked the car. Okay? Yeah. I didn't do a great job either because it was early. Anyway, I'm much better about mornings now. So anyway, all that to say, the moment you are visible, the moment you can be seen, you are making an impression, right? So you want to be aware of that. Don't ruin everybody's paint jobs in the parking lot, obviously. But when you show up and you're trying to figure out how things work, don't be in a panic, right? Try to appear to be calm and collected. And then when you present, there are a couple of things that you have to remember. The biggest one possibly is don't give everybody this view. If you're reading to your slides, as opposed to speaking to your audience, that's a problem, right? You also need to keep your nerves in check. So, a couple of things about that. Ideally, you want to stand with your feet shoulder width apart, knees slightly bent. Why do you want your knees bent? Yeah, so you don't pass out, right? Y'all have all seen America's Funniest Home Videos, which is pretty much a show about wedding parties where people pass out or whatever. Don't be that guy. Okay, so bend your knees, not, you're not playing shortstop. Don't get down here, but slightly bent so that your knees aren't locked, okay? I say not only do you give your audience your eyes, but give them your shoulders and your toes as well. Because this is not effective. But this opens me up to my audience, okay? By the way, if you're ever speaking to somebody, you're here, and you're speaking to them, and they start to turn like this, let them go. They want to leave, okay? So if I give you my shoulders, if I give you my toes, if I stay open to my audience, then that is going to hopefully keep them open to me. All right? A couple of other things that I see students doing all the time. Something I call floating, which is where you don't go anywhere, but you're walking 100 miles during the presentation because you got nervous feet, so you can't stand still, so you're just doing a little Texas two-step here with no music, right? Try to plant your feet, okay? But I generally, if I had a clicker, I'd be all over this room, believe me. I have to stay close to my enter button here, but I am not the kind of person that can stand still, especially when I'm speaking. I get all jazzed up and my energy gets going. So I have to remember a different way of doing this. So I walk to a point. I walk to a point, and I will stop, and I'll talk to this side of the room for a minute. And then I'll come over, and I'll walk to a point, and I'll stop and talk to this part of the room. And then maybe I make my major point up the middle, right? But the point is that I'm not just aimlessly walking. I'm moving with a purpose and planting my feet. I'm commanding the stage. Guys, this is a performance. So you want to command the stage, okay? Also, your hands. That's another thing that people do poorly. I call this dead spider hands. See the spider? We worked on the thing and it didn't work and we don't know why. I'd really rather be anywhere else. Don't have dead spider hands. Get your hands up above your elbows and gesture, right? If you're not sure about whether this works, watch any former president. Some of us remember George H.W. Bush, who was endlessly pilloried by Dana Carvey for his karate chop hands. No new taxes, read my lips, right? Bill Clinton used to do the point with no finger. I did not have relations with that woman, right? Donald Trump plays an invisible accordion. He does. And you go back, you'll see that very often. What they're doing is they're gesturing with a purpose. So it's not weak, pointless gestures, right? But it is gestures with a purpose, just like movements with a purpose. Okay? Oh, I forgot one other one. Try not to stand with your hip kicked out. Okay? Because after a while, this hip's going to start to hurt. You're going to have to kick it over to the other side. Pretty soon you're up here like you're in West Side Story or something, right? So anyway, just remembering staying centered with your body, open to your audience, moving with a purpose, whether it's your steps or your hands. Okay? By the way, I strongly recommend not using a laser pointer. You know what I would suggest using instead? Animations. And here's why. A laser pointer, if I'm talking to you guys today and I point to something with my laser pointer, it works just fine. But lately, every time I've done any kind of professional work, consulting or whatever, there's more than one screen. In other words, I'm usually in a place like this with about this many people with a big giant smartboard, and they're recording me and broadcasting me to Lafayette and New Orleans and Shreveport and wherever else, right? And if I've got a laser pointer, that shows one screen. But if I've got animation, then that thing gets circled or pointed at on all the screens. Okay? So I don't have a slide on that, but that's an important point that I would usually include at a later presentation. Anyway, strong movements, okay? One thing that sometimes does get to be an issue, it won't be an issue here today because of the way we are, but if we had a big projector hanging down from the ceiling, people who stand here, they get this look. Never a good look to have words on your face. Okay? Chances are this one is my favorite slide. Your eyes are magical. Your eyes are magical. Your eyes are magical. Your eyes are magical. Do y'all believe that your eyes are magical? Do you? If you doubt them, then later today, go to the mall or somewhere where there's a lot of people. Stand in the middle of the place and look up. And everybody who walks by will be like, what is up there? Who is up there? In fact, if I start staring out that window right now, if I start, oh, look, you looked. You even knew I was making a point and you looked, right? I can control you to a certain extent with my eyes, with my gaze, right? So that means a couple of things. First of all, you may have noticed that I'm bouncing my gaze. I've looked every one of you in the eye. Now, there's not a big number of you, so it's easy, but I've looked every single one of you in the eye multiple times today, right? That keeps you engaged, okay? The other thing about using my magical eyes, they're on the same side of my face as my mouth. So as I'm looking at you, I'm presenting my face to you. Well, most of you do a little supplemental lip reading, whether you mean to or not. Okay? So if you can see my mouth, it makes you easier, it makes understanding me easy. Does anybody in here have an accent? Everybody in here has an accent. It just happens to be the local accent for many of you, right? So if you're from South Louisiana and you go present in New York City, yeah, you're going to learn real quick. You have an accent, right? My father was a DJ and a professional voice announcer, not just a DJ, but he was the guy at WWVT 12 in Richmond, Virginia. He was that guy, okay? He moved to Minnesota after living in Tennessee and Virginia for most of his life. He moved to Minnesota, and all of a sudden he sounded like he fell off the casting truck to Green Acres. Let me tell you a few things. Well, for Lord's sakes, that's like falling off a log. It's like, Dad, what are you doing? He's like, well, it helps me meet the girls. Anyway, that's kind of a side note, and recorded, I guess. Anyway, don't show that to my father. So the point is that you always have an accent, okay? And I tell this to people who have an accent that is like unfamiliar to the region. That's actually a benefit to you, okay? Who's that woman on a Modern Family? Yeah, Sofia Vergara, right? Did I say it right? Something like that? She's not that great an actress. It's that accent that has made her a bazillionaire, right? Well, and that doesn't hurt. But lots of people have that, right? In Hollywood, anyway. That accent. Another one, Sean Connery. He's a decent actor, but let's face it, it's that brogue, right? What? Yes. And, Bond, James Bond. It's the brogue that kicks him up to that extra notch, right? Point is that accent can be a benefit to you, provided you don't speak so fast that nobody can understand you, and you do all of the other things that I'm talking about, giving the audience a chance to have that supplemental lip reading. But all that to say, an accent can be add a little musicality to the way you speak. It can be another thing to help the audience stay interested, provided it doesn't frustrate them. So if you slow down, if you enunciate, accent is actually a positive. And that's true of South Louisiana accents, too. Why else would James Carville be on Meet the Press every other Sunday? Well, it used to be anyway, right? It was the accent and the Skeletor bald head look. Anyway, don't want to get too far into politics. One other thing here. Can I borrow you for a second? So let's pretend that we are partners giving a presentation together, right? And you're on that side of the screen, and I'm on this side of the screen, and I'm talking, and then I finish. What should I do? I should take my magical eyes and put them where I want you to look now, which is on my partner or my partner's slides, okay? So, go ahead, talk.
My name is Chance.
She handled that so much better than any of the students did. No, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Very often, what will happen is students will have a partner, and when that partner starts talking, they imagine that they've suddenly become invisible, right? And so they're just like checking their watch, or like, "Ooh, so glad I'm done," or maybe, "Could you hear me okay? Was I okay?" They'll do all of this stuff that's a distraction from the partner, right? If my partner is speaking, then I want to use my magical eyes to keep your eyes on her or here, so that if you drift over to me, I'm not doing something distracting, right? But I'm helping you send those eyes right back to the two places where they belong. And if you can't do that, look at your shoes until you can. Okay? Everybody, let's give a golf clap to my partner. I've seen some terrible things. I actually saw somebody answer their phone in a presentation once. And that was not the worst. You want to know the worst? I thought they were going to take a sip of water. And they went. No. I wanted to crawl under my desk because I had given the presentation. Anyway, so all that to say that you don't want to be a distraction. You want to use your eyes and your body language to your best ability. Okay? Switching now to the posters. I don't have a lot of time to talk about poster design. I'll tell you this. Will this be available to everybody? Okay, this presentation is going to be available to you. This is actually something I did. I worked with one of the professors at LSU on a textbook for Introduction to Engineering. And this is the chart that I gave on posters. It's kind of meta. Okay? So in other words, it talks about avoiding long paragraphs and using bullets to lower the word count and a hierarchy of fonts and all of this. So I'll let you review this as you like. Okay? But I guess the biggest thing that I want to say about a poster is it's very similar to a PowerPoint slide in that it needs to be primarily visual. It's a visual abstract, I would say, okay, which to me means you don't need to put an abstract on it, because it is a visual abstract. But sometimes people will say, you must have an abstract. Okay, keep it brief, right? But the thing about a poster is the big difference between a poster presentation and a PowerPoint presentation is the way the content is delivered. In a PowerPoint presentation, I decide what we talk about. I decide what we talk about next. I decide how long we talk about each thing because I advance the slide when I'm ready to move on. With a poster presentation, the audience generally determines the way the talk is going to go. If I walk up to your poster and I'm the safety guy, I might not care about all this design stuff. I don't want to talk about the safety that comes on the last column over here in the end. And if I want to talk about that, you can't go, yes, well, I want to talk about my introduction, because the safety guy's going to be like, yeah, no, why aren't you wearing PPE in that picture? You know, where's your goggles? What's wrong with you? Right? Or whatever. It's also a good idea when people prepare posters to have what some people call it an elevator speech. It's really not an elevator speech. It's more a quick pitch. Okay, an elevator speech, you don't know what that is? It's this idea that, that if you are, let's say you're going for a job interview, and the interview's on the top floor, and you get on the elevator with the guy that's interviewing you, you want to be able to give him the pitch before that elevator lets off on the top floor. It's a 2-minute quick, here's why I'm awesome speech, right, or something, whatever you're trying to accomplish. But with this, the poster, what you're trying to avoid, usually poster presentations will be a poster, you're standing next to it, and there's just whole rows of people or whatever, there's millions of people walking around, so you're competing for attention. So what will happen very often is people walk up to your poster, they'll go, and there's an awkward silence, and you don't speak, and they don't speak, and then you go, and nothing's been accomplished, right? But if they walk up to you and you give them just a split second to glance at your poster, and then you say, this is actually a program, it's a campus-wide program at LSU aimed at improving undergraduate communication skills in the disciplines. It's called Communications Across the Curriculum. Do you have any questions? You've broken the ice. You've given them that little foot in the door, so to speak, so that now they're ready to ask those questions without being the awkward one that speaks first. Right? Posters, actually, a lot of times students think those died in 3rd grade. And in some engineering fields, they may have. But in other engineering fields, you'll be going to professional conferences. If you go into academics, you're totally going to be doing posters, believe me. So there are still ways to, places where posters themselves are important. But whether posters specifically are important or not, the ability to take a complex project and reduce it to the limited real estate of a poster is a skill that every engineer ought to have. Taking something huge and boiling it down to its most essential elements and preparing it for consumption by an audience, that's a valuable skill. And posters are one way to teach that. So even if it's not a product that students will have to engage in regularly, it's a good process for them to go through. It's a communicating to learn process. Okay, do y'all ever talk about that? Communicating to learn versus learning to communicate? One of my favorite things. So very often we'll give informal assignments that are not graded, or maybe what they are is scaffolded. In other words, you're going to building blocks to the final assignment, right? If you are doing something with low risk, then that takes the pressure off for the students to experiment, to try things, to learn to do things. I do it with writing. At the beginning of every one of my English classes, we do a 2-minute prompt where I say something about the homework from the night before. Tell me what the most important thing you found in the chapter last night was. Write it. And they'll just, I think they'll call them bell ringers here. If my teenage son is any indication, he hates them. But I tell him they're important and he's got to do them anyway. But anyway, so you just write for a couple minutes just to get your mind focused on the topic at hand. Okay? But there's other ways to do it. We have a graphics teacher, Paige Davis. She's an engineering graphics teacher. And I told her about that concept, and she started doing it in her SolidWorks class, to where first thing in the morning, she says, okay, open up your program and draw something. And what she found was because students were doing things on their own, she was able to teach concepts using their quick writes, sharing those with the class. Oh, look here, Betty did a great thing because of the center line and the exploded view and the what. I'm using terms I don't understand, but still, she was able to use that. And the students had this low-risk way to engage with the program, engage with the work, without fear of getting a low grade. Now, there's a formal grade at the end, but these informal steps along the way are a wonderful way to teach. Okay? I think I'm rambling off topic now, so I'll go ahead and finish up and say that the most important thing to me that students learn about communications and engineering is to stay off the autopilot. When I first started at LSU, there was a student worker we had who said, I'd give the same presentation, or I'd give the same paper every time, I just put different data in. And it made me sad, because he's not doing a good job. And I'm sure he's doing a great job tending bar somewhere now or selling real estate or something. I doubt he's an engineer. I don't think you survive long term with that approach. Right? You've got to engage with the work you're doing. Who remembers the three things? The three questions. It's been almost an hour. Audience. Who's my audience? What's their interest level and what's their ability to understand? Purpose. What specifically am I trying to accomplish? Credibility. What do I have to do to maintain credibility with this audience so they'll listen to me? If you know those three things, then you're in good shape to make good choices. That's what I have for you today. Does anybody have any questions or comments or?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
When you're teaching this in college, I think that high school, ninth grade, as soon as they get through high school, they should have something like this, what you just did. I think it's excellent.
Well,
but and they need that way they would have all that advancement, I think, to learn in high school.
I agree. And at 11 o'clock, Dr. Harvey's going to be here, and he's my boss, so tell him that. No.
Because it's excellent, and if you learn in college, I remember learning something like this in college now. But anyway, but I think in high school, I have the kids. What you have said that not to do, they do, and these are seniors, and if they just even in middle school, if they learn that, it would be.
I'll tell you this, I've been glad to see how receptive the students have been when I've given this talk here for Vanessa's students. I mean, they really do take it to heart. Now, I don't know how well they retain it and transfer it to future years, but they at least don't go to sleep, which I appreciate. But I agree, and one of the things we do at LSU is we try to get this to them either in their introductory level classes or at 1050, because a lot of times I hear students say, I went into engineering because I don't want to write. I don't like writing, so I'm going to be an engineer. And I got news for you, Jack. Most engineers write more than most writers I know, and I know a lot of writers and a lot of engineers.